Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you, Dr. Paul?
I'm doing very well,
Good.
and guess what? We're going to talk a little bit about foreign policy and some of the silly things that we do that are very dangerous, and people die for it. From it, and this has to do with Somalia. You know, it's not in the news every single day, and a lot of people who paid attention a few years back, Somalia was a big deal in Mogadishu.
Yeah.
Mogadishu, and that was under Clinton, and that's when there was some Blackhawks, a couple of Blackhawks shot down. Even a movie made of this, 1992, 93, in that time, and it was a big deal. Then it's been rather quiet, and I'm even surprised that all of a sudden, you know, activity there. And there's a write up here today in the Daily Beast about what went on last month, that there was described as a massacre by our special forces. And I get to thinking, you know, what in the world are we doing there? And have we been there all the time? And even when we started talking a little bit more about Africa, I know I think you were a little bit surprised that we were more involved there than even what we were claiming was happening. It was just practically almost every country we have somebody in there. And special forces are pretty vital. I mean, they're very much engaged, but they're special and they're very secret, and they're probably not counted because 20,000 troops aren't even accounted for where they are, even though we know they're overseas. But here comes this story of this massacre, and it's one of those stories where families are involved and civilians are killed and children are involved. You just wonder, why in the world are we there? And you think, well, it's always for national interest, national security, but boy, you have to search and you have to really stretch it to claim that we're there and our special forces are killing civilians. Our government is admitting to it. They're not, you know, in denial at all, but it's always for noble reasons. It's pretty disheartening, and I think that that we do need to talk about Africa like the other places, but it represents, you know, a philosophy of foreign policy. Why are we anywhere? You know, why have we been in constant wars, you know, for these last 16, 17 years and even before, but why are we still fighting in Afghanistan? Always the same question. But this is a specific incident. It's outrageous, and it calls people's attention to just what's going on, and people should ask, why are we there, and do we have to be there? When are we coming home?
Yeah, as we talked about before the show, sometimes when we talked about many thousands killed, civilian deaths, it's hard to wrap your head around it, so we tend to not focus. In this, it's a very personal story. This is a small village in Somalia called Barire, and apparently in August there was a raid where 10 people were killed, 10 civilians, 3 children were among the dead. Small village, everyone knew each other. The people were furious. They brought the bloodied bodies to Mogadishu to put on display, and the U.S. was apparently involved in this. This is according to the Daily Beast's investigation. Very well put together, long piece, a lot of detail. Well, AFRICOM today or yesterday came out with a response. They didn't respond directly to the Daily Beast, but they said, we've had a thorough investigation. Don't worry, the only people that were killed were enemy combatants. So, case closed. They didn't address the accusations. They didn't address the investigation. Just case closed.
But sometimes they admit to some civilians being killed, like civilians are different. But I get to thinking, you know, in a country that we get involved in, you know, they separated the militants and the civilians, and we're not supposed to be killing civilians. But where are the lines drawn? If somebody invades a country, foreigners are involved, wouldn't everybody be a civilian even if you take up arms or become more radicalized because our presence there? And yet they always say, well, you know, how many civilians are killed? And there's a lot of civilians being killed, whether it's just in Somalia now or what's happening in Iraq and Syria continuously, even in Afghanistan. But the whole thing about our troops there raises the question, of course, the overall question is of foreign policy. What in the world are we doing there, and what does it accomplish? And it just doesn't make enough sense for the American people to condone this. But they don't condone it by saying, that sounds good, yeah, I'll go along with that. They don't have any idea about this, and maybe this emphasis in this story, if it were spread, and if this kind of thing were put on the evening news, I recall very clearly, how My Lai changed the tone. It was a much worse massacre, but massacre means taking guns by ruthless, powerful military people who shouldn't be there and just mowing people down for needless reasons. And that's more or less what they're saying. When it gets in the word massacre, and there's not that much tremendous denial of all this, and because I think I even looked at the bullets that killed these people, and they came from American rifles. They didn't come from, Somali rifles, our so-called allies.
Yeah, that's true. And the Daily Beast piece, the reason why it caught our attention too is it puts together all the components that we have seen so many times before. In Somalia, the U.S., what is the U.S. doing there? Well, it's fighting al-shabab, which is an ally of al-Qaeda, we're supposed to think. But here's what happens with U.S. troops in Somalia. They get in there, rival clans. There's a small area that's very fertile in Somalia. And rival clans are fighting over this. So what happens is the U.S. comes in, they don't understand the situation, they get bad intelligence. One clan says another clan is al-Shabaab, so the U.S. goes and attacks them. They rush into operations that they don't understand the complexities of human relationships there. The other thing they talked about, they're using biased translators who have some kind of an axe to grind. So the involvement in Somalia and in Africa in general has actually ramped up under President Trump. Earlier this year, he approved really expanded military operations in Africa because we got to take out al-Qaeda is the claim.
And we always have to have this monster to go after. And al-Qaeda is the monster that we're dealing with, but we help create it. Some people think we literally created it, and when we go back, we've gone back quite frequently. Whether it's the Taliban or al-Qaeda, we've been instrumental in financing them. And then we supported, just recently in Syria, we facilitated the escape. We didn't want to destroy all of al-Qaeda because we have to have justification for our spending money on our national interests. And we create the chaos, and then we use it as an excuse to fight against the very people that we claim that we have nothing to do with, and yet we help them. I frequently ask questions to myself and to you and tell you, why in the world are we here? But there was a little clip today, a little news clip that this might answer it partially, that in 2017, this year alone, we've spent sold $42 billion worth of weapons. That doesn't even count the weapons we give away.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we pay, in foreign aid or military budget, we give the money, and then under the condition that they buy our weapons. It's a big industry, and sometimes it's oil, but Somalia is not quite so easy. You can't just label it, other than the fact that what you suggest is there's some bad guys there that don't like us, and we have to go wherever, and Trump said that's his policy. We'll go wherever is necessary, and we're going to have a 100% destruction of the terrorists. Never asking the question, why do they become terrorists? Why do they hate us? Why do they want to kill us? And why do they aggravate us? And they never really ask the question, and they certainly never come down with the question, maybe we incite them. Maybe our policies literally is the issue itself, and that's their recruiting tool. We've heard that. A lot of people realize that. More people realize it now than they did 10 years ago, but we still have a long way to go because we have the troops around the world, and there's a lot of them, more than our government tells us, and it's policy. I mean, if we tell people where we are and what we're doing, then the enemy knows what we're doing. And so Trump's position is the enemy's not supposed to know. Unfortunately, the American people are thrown into that category. We're not allowed to know. We're not told. Even Congress doesn't even know. So, and in the military, commanders are making the decisions more so than ever before. And Trump said, well, my military commanders know what they're doing, and we'll just leave them alone. But we are going to get every single terrorist and kill them.
Can you imagine these guys, they go over there, they don't know a thing about the language, they don't know a thing about the culture, the traditions, the history, and somehow they're supposed to sort out these rival clan fights, these different things, and decide whether they're terrorists or just rival clans fighting each other. The thing is, if al-Shabaab is what they say it is, it's an al-Qaeda-linked terrorist organization, can you imagine giving them a better gift than to kill 10 civilians, including 3 children, having their bodies laid out in the Capitol saying, this is what the Americans are doing to you guys. Join us and we'll fight back. I mean, who would resist that, really, if you think about it?
You know, it reminds me of the story I've told before, and that was when in the military, I was driving with other Air Force people through Pakistan up to Khyber Pass, which was near Kabul and right to the Afghan border. And the military people that were with me were more experienced. They had made this trip before, and they pointed to it and said, Ron, you see all those hills up there? It looked just barren, no trees and nothing. He says, there are tribes up there. And there's been a lot of people who have tried to conquer them, over 100. This was a history lesson from the military people. He says, and they have never been conquered, but they have a tribal life. And this is what you just said. Our military doesn't understand this, and they don't understand that, you know, the outsiders have tried to say, well, that tribal life isn't any good. Well, yeah, maybe they're not building skyscrapers, but are they hurting us? You know, but we're going to change them. And then we get involved with bin Laden, the Mujahideen, and then the Taliban, and then the al-Qaeda. And we keep selling weapons. So somebody's making a buck off this.
Yeah, and now we're trying to get rid of those tribes with Moabs. You know, we're going to change the horizon. But, you know, we also noticed that another report that came out about civilian deaths, and this is sort of a theme, I guess, for today. This is a specific instance, but the military has admitted now that it's killed at least 800 civilians in Syria and Iraq since 2014. At least, I think the key word is those 2 words, at least, because according to Amnesty, I think didn't they estimate the number was quite a bit higher? Yeah,
they went up to 28,000, and they probably don't know exactly, again, who are civilians and who aren't, but they said it could be up to 28,000. The admission of 800, I guess, was, well, it's too bad or something, but it's criminal is what it really is. So it's good that people will do some investigation. This comes from, the Daily Beast is more progressive, and they're not as consistent as we'd like. But if they're going to do the investigation and tell us about it, this is information that's more believable than the propaganda put out by our government. You know, there's a big argument on fake news, Republicans and Democrats and Russia and all this stuff going on. But they never challenge the same people who are arguing back and forth about political fake news. They don't ever argue about our government's fake news and the propaganda of why we go to war. And, especially in the last couple decades that we've been more involved in it, and it's all propaganda, and there's never any real argument about it. It's always for national security interests. And, of course, the one argument that I find detestable is, yes, our troops go over there. We got to thank our troops for saving our Constitution and protecting our liberties. And the more they do over there, the more protection we get, which is an absolute untruth. I mean, it has nothing to do, matter of fact, it's the opposite. By endorsing and holding militarism on a high pedestal to do these things, it makes things much worse. I mean, we're undermining the Constitution, and unfortunately, we're up against bipartisanship here because there's very, very little resistance against all the expenditures that are necessary to continue these operations.
Yeah, it's like a house of cards, isn't it? But the fact of the matter is the al-Shabaab is a small group in Somalia. They're not about to attack the United States. They're not about to invade the United States. It's a justification for the U.S. to be militarily involved in Africa. I think we said 54 out of 55 countries, or 53 out of 54 countries. That's what it's all about. It's the U.S. global military empire. Where is Congress? Congress is completely asleep. They're not interested, and the wars continue.
And I want to thank the viewers for tuning in today. And I know this is a so-called small story, but it has a great deal of significance because the word massacre has been used, and it's probably exactly was that. It was carried out by our special forces. And yes, 10 people were killed, and that's a small number compared to the other numbers that we have been involved in. But the fact that it grips you and gets the emotions going, it's a story that people ought to look at. And like I said in our program even today, it's too bad that we don't see more reports on television, but that would not serve the interests of the special interest. It would not serve the interests of the neoconservatives who run our foreign policy. It would not serve the interests of the bipartisan deep state. And therefore you're not going to. But, My Lai woke the American people up, and after that, things were downhill for our support for the war because the American people finally turned against the war. After 60,000 Americans died. Do we have to wait for that? Now we're running operations where Americans don't have boots on the ground, except on occasion when they know they can't get shot at. But it's going on, it's different, but it's every bit as dangerous because when you think about what's happening with Saudi Arabia going on right now and the fighting going on in Yemen, the concerted effort to overthrow the government in Iran, and also the potential breaking out of war in North Korea. And that's probably more than one side that's causing the trouble there. So there is a need for all of us to understand what non-intervention means in foreign policy, and that the American people understand that and come to our senses before another 10,000, 20,000, or 40,000 people die. That is casualties on our side, but many casualties on the other side, because every time we kill somebody over there, believe me, it's a recruiting tool to get radicals. So yes, we've had some military victories against al-Qaeda, and that's very, very good. Hopefully that'll slow things up. But believe me, the enemies of America are not going to go away as long as we believe that we have this moral obligation, and we are indignant about it, that we are going to go in and establish our principles in these countries, whether they appear to be somewhat better. You can't spread peace at the end of a barrel of a gun. You can't force our way of living on other people just by using military force. So wake up. We should know about non-interventionism. Non-interventionism is pro-America. It should be considered patriotic. It should be just plain common sense, and it should be the right thing to do. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.